I always thought Lucy loved the spotlight. She was one of those people who could walk into a room and subtly rearrange the mood without saying a word. That night at the charity dinner in New Orleans, she wasn't just glowing, she was magnetic. Dressed in a form-fitting emerald gown that shimmered under the soft lights of the old French Quarter Hall, Lucy looked like a woman I hadn't seen in a long time. Not my wife, not exactly. A more polished version. Edged. She was radiant. Energized. And it made me uneasy. She had insisted we attend. It's for the gallery, Trevor. We need to be seen supporting the arts. She said it with a smile, tossing the invitation onto the kitchen counter 2 weeks before the event like she was already rehearsing her role. At the time, I didn't think much of it. Lucy had always been driven, especially when it came to her career in nonprofit arts fundraising. She cared deeply, or at least she used to. Lately, I wasn't sure what she cared about anymore. The ballroom was filled with well-dressed donors and curators, a haze of perfume and ambition hanging in the air. I recognized most of the faces: fellow board members, gallery owners, museum benefactors. But Lucy? She floated from conversation to conversation like a thread pulled tight through silk. And then there was Jaden. Jaden Whitmore, one of the more high-profile curators from the East Coast who recently started consulting with the foundation Lucy volunteered for. I'd met him once before, briefly, at an exhibit opening in Dallas. Young, sharp, and smooth in a way that always left me checking my tie in his presence. He was the kind of guy who treated compliments like currency and always seemed to be paying someone. I noticed Lucy talking to him near the hors d'oeuvre table, her hand touching his arm in a way that felt practiced, not affectionate, but intentional. I wasn't jealous exactly. I just felt something. Something I couldn't name. Maybe the quiet clanging of a bell I'd ignored too long. I walked toward them, but just before I got close, she glanced over her shoulder, whispered something to Jaden, and then they slipped past a black curtain near the stage. Curiosity sparked in my chest. It wasn't that I expected something salacious. I'm not that guy, the one who leaps to conclusions. But the way they moved, in sync, purposeful, it didn't sit right. So I followed. The corridor behind the stage was dimly lit and smelled of old wood and dusted velvet. I kept my distance, slow steps muted by the carpet. Around the corner, I paused. Voices, low and playful, echoed faintly. Then I heard it. Laughter. Hers. Bright and flirtatious, not the laugh she gave me over coffee or dinner. This one was lighter. Like she was laughing with someone who didn't know all her sharp edges. And then, silence. Followed by the soft, unmistakable sound of a kiss. I froze. It wasn't long or dramatic. It was quick, maybe even casual. But the sound punched the air out of my lungs. My hands felt clammy. I backed away, heart pounding in my ears, trying to catch my breath before she returned. A moment later, Lucy appeared from behind the curtain. Alone. She smoothed her dress, adjusted an earring, and spotted me as she stepped out. Her eyes widened for a split second, just long enough to register surprise. But she recovered quickly. Trevor, she said, smiling. What are you doing back here? I didn't answer immediately. I could ask you the same thing. She laughed, brushing past me like I was just another guest in a crowded room. Jaden was showing me the backstage layout. They're thinking about updating the lighting rig for future installations. It's fascinating. Honestly, I wish you could have seen the schematics. Her voice was breezy, as if she hadn't just disappeared for 10 minutes with a man I barely knew. As if I'd imagined it all. I didn't press it. Maybe I should have. But I didn't. Instead, I smiled, nodded, and returned to my table. The rest of the night passed like a dream I couldn't wake from. Lucy was animated during dinner, her stories loud, her laughter brighter than it had been in months. She didn't notice that I was quiet. Or maybe she did and just didn't care. After dessert, I told her I was heading out early, some vague excuse about work in the morning, and kissed her cheek. She nodded, distracted, already turned toward another circle of guests. But I didn't leave. I wandered to the bar on the upper level where the noise was duller and waited. I wasn't sure why. Something in my gut told me there was more to see. And I wasn't wrong. Lucy eventually joined a small group at the bar, 3 women and 1 man. She ordered a drink, leaned in close to her friend, and laughed again. A little too hard. I watched from behind a tall column near the coat check, out of view. Then I heard it. Trevor? God, he's sweet. But so safe. You know, she said, twirling her glass. I mean, I love him. Of course I do. He's just predictable. Her friend raised an eyebrow. Predictable isn't always a bad thing. Lucy shrugged. No, but it's not exactly thrilling either. I felt my stomach turn. I didn't move. I didn't step out and confront her. I waited until she left with her friends, her heels tapping against the old tile floor, her laughter still echoing. Later that night, I got a message. It was from Liam, the bartender. We'd gone to Tulane together, lost touch, but ran into each other recently. He'd always had a good read on people. He sent me a voice memo. I thought you want to hear this, he said. He'd recorded the entire conversation at the bar. Lucy talking about me like I was a houseplant she forgot to water. Laughing off our marriage like it was a worn-out sweater she didn't have the heart to toss. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling while Lucy changed into her pajamas, humming softly in the bathroom. I pretended to be asleep when she climbed in beside me, her back to mine. It wasn't just betrayal. It wasn't just the kiss or the words. It was the fact that it wasn't a slip. It was a pattern. A preparation. She'd made room for this, cleared space in her heart for someone else, even if she hadn't admitted it to herself yet. That night, I knew whatever was happening between us wasn't an accident. It had been slowly, carefully constructed. And I'd ignored it for far too long. I wish I could say the moment I heard that recording everything changed. That I suddenly became sharp-eyed and ready to confront the truth. But that's not how it happened. What followed wasn't a burst of action. It was slow erosion. When we got back home from New Orleans, Lucy was her usual self, or the version of her I'd become used to. Polished, focused, distracted. She asked about my meetings, kissed my cheek, left her coffee cup on the counter like always. But now I noticed things. Little things I'd shrugged off before. The first was the wedding ring. Or rather, the absence of it. She had stopped wearing it a few months ago, saying it irritated her finger while painting. It feels heavy, she'd said, laughing. Like it cuts off my circulation. At the time, I believed her. Or wanted to. Lucy had always been sensitive to jewelry. She wore it for events, not errands. But now? It felt like an alibi she'd prepared in advance. Her studio nights also began to stretch. She'd leave around 6 with a bag slung over her shoulder, hair still damp from a quick shower, makeup minimal but perfectly applied. She used to paint in oversized shirts and sweats. Now it was high-waisted jeans and soft turtlenecks. Still casual, still plausible. But too curated. When I asked how her work was going, her answers got shorter. Fine. Busy. I'm in a groove. The last time I tried to press further, she frowned like I'd interrupted something sacred. Trevor, she said, without turning from the sink, you don't need to micromanage me. I'm not one of your clients. I wasn't. I was her husband. But I let it go. Even the way she used her phone had changed. She used to leave it face up on the table, the lock screen glowing with little reminders and texts from friends. Now it was always face down. Always on silent. Her passwords changed casually, of course. Work update, she'd said. Security stuff. She started guarding her privacy like it was part of her identity. If I so much as glanced in her direction while she was texting, she'd tilt the screen away or get up to walk into another room. One evening while we were watching something on Netflix, her phone buzzed. She didn't check it right away. Just stared at the screen, waiting for the preview to disappear. I glanced over. Just a name, S. That was it. She turned the screen off quickly, smiling like nothing had happened. Want tea? She asked, already standing. I watched her walk into the kitchen, her silhouette framed by the hallway light. She stayed in there longer than it takes to make tea. When she came back, her phone was nowhere in sight. She curled up on the couch beside me, legs tucked under her like nothing had happened. It wasn't just what she was doing. It was what she wasn't doing. Touch. That disappeared almost completely. Lucy had always been affectionate. Not in public, but at home, she'd touch my arm when she passed behind me, rest her head on my shoulder while we read, run her fingers through my hair when I sat at the kitchen island. Yeah? Nothing. She still said love you when she left the house. But it felt mechanical. Like brushing her teeth. Like locking the door. One Saturday morning, she got a text while we were having breakfast. She read it quickly, pushed her chair back, and said she had to run by the studio, forgot a sketch pad I need. On a Saturday? I asked, more curious than accusatory. She nodded, already grabbing her keys. I won't be long. When she returned, she carried a grocery bag and said the sketch pad had been at home the whole time. She smiled, kissed my cheek, and went upstairs to shower. I stared at that bag for a long time after she left it on the counter. Milk, bread, shampoo. Nothing suspicious. But the timeline didn't add up. If she went to the studio first, she wouldn't have had time to also go to the store. And if she didn't go to the studio, where did she go? The more I thought about it, the more questions surfaced. Questions I didn't want to ask because I wasn't sure I wanted the answers. I remembered one night, months earlier, before the gala, when she came home from her painting session with her scarf missing and her cheeks flushed. She said it had been cold in the studio. The heaters busted again, she explained. She never mentioned it again. And I, like an idiot, never asked. And then there was her mood, this strange mixture of cheerfulness and distance. She was pleasant, polite, but absent. It was like living with a very convincing ghost. We still slept in the same bed, but even in sleep we were miles apart. She used to curl toward me, arm draped across my chest. Now she hugged her side of the bed, back turned, body curled tight. If I reached for her, she'd shift just enough to avoid the contact without ever fully waking up. That did something to me. A slow rot. I started waking up earlier, staying out longer, taking meetings I didn't need, volunteering for business trips I'd normally avoid. It wasn't just avoidance. It was survival. But the moment everything began to really shift, came on a random Tuesday. She was sitting at the dining room table, sketching something. I walked in, kissed the top of her head, and asked, "What are you working on?" She closed the notebook quickly. "Just a draft for a potential grant application." That struck me as strange. Lucy rarely did grant writing. That was mostly handled by a coordinator. But I didn't argue. I nodded and turned to make coffee. Over my shoulder I said, "Didn't know you were working with grants again." She hesitated for just a second. "Yeah, well, things change." Her voice was light. Too light. I didn't reply. I just stood there, back to her, wondering when exactly things had changed. And more importantly, why. Later that night I retrieved the mail. A single envelope caught my attention. Addressed to Lucy from a law office I didn't recognize. I placed it on the counter without a word. She found it before I could ask. Opened it quickly, read it silently, and then shoved it into her purse. "What was that?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She looked up, surprised. "Oh, just something from the foundation. Legal stuff for the board." Boring. I didn't press. But I remembered the name of the firm. That's when I started digging. Not obsessively, not yet. Just checking. Little things. I started taking *TS of her social media posts, noting where and when they were taken. I started tracking which nights she claimed to be at the studio and compared them to the security cam footage we had installed after a break-in 2 years ago. What I found wasn't damning. But it wasn't innocent either. There were gaps. Missing timestamps. Doors never opened when she claimed to be inside. Activity that didn't match her stories. The pieces didn't fit. And that's when it hit me. They were never meant to. She was spinning a version of herself. And she assumed I wouldn't notice. Or worse, that I didn't care enough to look. But I did. And now I couldn't stop. The night I opened Lucy's old laptop, I told myself it was harmless. She hadn't used it in over a year. It was buried in the upstairs closet behind a box of holiday decorations and a stack of unused canvases. The battery was dead, but once I found the charger in her desk drawer, I sat cross-legged on the floor, waiting for it to boot up like some archaeologist about to uncover a fossil. I don't know what I was expecting, some kind of digital smoking G***N? Maybe. Or maybe I was hoping for nothing. Hoping I was wrong. The desktop loaded slowly, littered with folders titled Grants, 2019_Showcase, New Studio_Proposal. I clicked aimlessly at first, opening files with generic names, budgets, press releases, PDFs about venue layouts. It all felt legitimate. Professional. But then I found a folder named Tempbox. The kind of name you give something when you don't want to think too hard about what it contains. Inside were dozens of Word docs, *TS, and an old cache of her browser bookmarks. My heart began to pound as I scrolled. Then I saw the email client. The one she used before switching to Gmail. It was still logged in. I opened it. It took a moment to sync, then hundreds of messages appeared. The first thing I noticed was a name. Sean. I didn't recognize it. Not from her work. Not from her friend circle. But there it was. Over and over. Sometimes in her inbox. Sometimes in her sent mail. The earliest was dated nearly 8 months ago. Subject, Friday, same time? I clicked. I can't stop thinking about that night. You were right, I needed to let go. Let's make it a regular thing. I'll say I'm painting late. He won't question it. I sat there, breath caught in my throat. That was me. I was the placeholder in her story. The convenient absence she could write around. I kept reading. Message after message. They talked about dinner, weekends out of town, nights spent in the new place. They joked about gallery openings they'd skip to stay in bed. They even referred to me like I was already gone. Sean, when are we going to stop pretending this is temporary? Lucy, I know. Soon. I promise. I'm working on it. I want to be free before we make anything official. Free. I scrolled faster, the heat in my chest building. And then I found it, a PDF attachment titled lease_signed. I opened it. There it was. A lease agreement for a one-bedroom apartment in the Garden District. Signed 3 weeks before the gala in New Orleans. Names on the contract, Lucy and Sean. No mention of me. No trace of hesitation. I reread the dates. This wasn't a fallback plan. This wasn't a just in case. She had planned for a future, just not with me. I leaned back on the carpet, the laptop still warm in my lap. The ceiling above me felt like it was closing in. I wasn't crying. Not yet. My body was too full of adrenaline to feel sadness. Instead, I felt clarity. This wasn't just an affair. This was a second life. She hadn't stumbled. She had constructed it. Every lie she told me, the studio nights, the board meetings, the missed texts, they weren't born out of guilt or panic. They were rehearsed. Tidy. Calculated. I clicked into a message labeled Weekend Plans. It read, "The place is almost ready. I'll move the first load next week while Trevor's in Atlanta. I'll say it's for the silent auction. He won't notice. He never does." That line gutted me. Not because of the betrayal, but because it was true. I didn't notice. Not until it was too late. I closed the laptop and sat in the silence for what felt like hours. I didn't know what time it was. I didn't care. The house was still. The kind of quiet that hums. I thought about confronting her right away. Printing the emails. Throwing the lease in her face. Watching her flail. But something stopped me. I didn't want a confrontation. I wanted confirmation. So I opened my phone and searched the address listed on the lease. The building was sleek, modern, one of those gentrified complexes with historic charm and $2,400 a month rent. I scrolled through its gallery. Hardwood floors, tall windows, minimalist finishes. It looked nothing like our house. I imagined her there, lighting candles, pouring wine, laughing on the phone with Sean, all while I cooked dinner and checked her studio lights remotely like some devoted idiot. I felt something in my chest crack. Still, I needed more. Something tangible. Something I couldn't explain away later when my heart tried to betray my brain. I started calling. The leasing office opened at 9 a.m. I dialed the number just after sunrise. My voice was steady. I told them I was looking for a unit, specifically one like the one listed under Lucy's name. I mentioned I'd seen a lease online and wanted to know if anything like it was still available. The woman on the phone paused. "That's actually a current lease," she said. "I can't share details, obviously, but it's an active unit. Fully furnished, moved in last month." Moved in. I thanked her and hung up. Fully furnished. She didn't just sign a lease. She moved in. She decorated. She settled. And I had no idea. When Lucy came home that evening, she was radiant. Fresh blowout. Nails done. The kind of glow that used to follow a day at the spa. She kissed my cheek. "Long day," she sighed. "Board meeting ran over." I nodded. I wanted to ask her how Sean was. How the new apartment felt. If the couch we'd picked together 5 years ago had made the cut or if she started fresh. Instead, I asked, "Want me to cook?" She smiled. "No. Let's order in. I've got a headache." I watched her scroll through food delivery apps on her phone, fingers tapping easily, lips pursed in mock deliberation. She was so at ease. And I realized she didn't feel guilty. Not really. If anything, she felt relieved. Like she'd finally created enough distance to breathe. Later that night, when she fell asleep beside me, I got up and walked downstairs. I stared at the empty kitchen, the photos on the fridge, the echo of years we'd built. And I made a promise to myself. This wasn't going to end with quiet grief. I wouldn't disappear. I wouldn't be the forgotten husband in a sad divorce story. I was going to show her exactly what betrayal feels like when it's brought into the light. Finding the lease had been like pulling a pin from a grenade. I thought the explosion had already gone off. I thought discovering Sean, the emails, the apartment, that was it. The climax. The part where I picked up the pieces and moved on. But I was wrong. There was more. So much more. And I wasn't prepared for any of it. The apartment lease was a puzzle piece. But the picture it formed, that was still incomplete. Something kept nagging at me. Sean didn't fit. At least, not entirely. The emails were in asterisk mate, yes, and they painted a story of sneaky meetups and romantic longing, but there was a hollowness to them, like a script Lucy was reciting rather than feeling. I started looking through the email chains again, searching, now, for the edges. That's when I noticed something strange. Sean was always the one chasing. Asking when they'd be together, when she'd leave me. Lucy's responses were enthusiastic, sure, but restrained. Non-committal. It was almost like she was managing him. Why? If Sean was the endgame, why wasn't she more invested? The answer came 2 days later. After another restless night spent mentally cataloging our entire marriage, I woke up with a new resolve. I drove straight to the apartment complex listed on the lease and walked into the leasing office. I'd planned a cover story that I was relocating from Austin and curious about what floor plans they offered. The woman behind the desk, Ashley, was friendly and distracted. She handed me a brochure and started rattling off square footage details without much enthusiasm. Then I said, I think a friend of mine just moved in here. Maybe I could see their layout as a reference. Ashley looked up. Sure, what unit? I paused, then recited the number from the lease. Oh, she said, recognition flashing across her face. That's Marco's place. I blinked. Marco. She nodded. Marco Galliano. He moved in about 6 weeks ago. Pretty sure his girlfriend just joined him last month. Girlfriend. Tall woman, kind of artsy looking? I asked, keeping my voice even. Yeah, that's her, Ashley said. Red scarf most days. Always has a tote bag with those rolled-up canvases sticking out. Lucy. I thanked her and left the office, heart slamming against my ribs. Sean wasn't the main event. He was a distraction. A cover. Marco was the real story. Back in the car, I opened my browser and typed his name. Marco Galliano. The search results were immediate. Owner of a private gallery in Texas. Specializes in mixed media modern art. Held residencies in Santa Fe, Austin, and most recently New Orleans. Of course. I clicked on his gallery's Instagram. The first post was dated just under 2 months ago, a photo of a vineyard in Fredericksburg. A man and a woman back turned to the camera holding hands. The woman wore a familiar rust-colored jacket. Lucy's. I scrolled faster. There were more. Photos of them walking through antique markets. Clinking wine glasses in dimly lit bistros. Side by side at what looked like a small, invite-only gallery opening. In one image, Marco was kissing her forehead. In another, Lucy was painting in a sunlit room, barefoot, laughing, like she had nothing in the world to hide. Each post hit like a body blow. Not just because she was with someone else, but because she looked whole. Unburdened. Effortlessly happy. It wasn't an affair. It was a life. One she'd built while keeping me in the waiting room. I clicked into the captions, hoping for something, anything that hinted at remorse. There was none. Instead, the tags were cheerful, even proud. #artisan-residence, #found-me-forever, #gallery-love. My jaw clenched. Found my forever? I wanted to scream. To call her. To drive to that apartment and throw her betrayal in her face. But I didn't. Not yet. I started cross-referencing dates on the gallery posts with the timestamps from her studio visits. Half of them didn't align. One post had them wine tasting on a weekend. She told me she'd flown to Miami for a work retreat. I'd even dropped her off at the airport. Apparently, she never boarded the flight. The deeper I dug, the worse it got. A series of tagged photos revealed even more. Lucy at a rooftop brunch with Marco and 2 other couples. Lucy beaming next to Marco in front of a mural that read, "Trust the journey." I wanted to be sick. Back home, I opened her calendar app. I knew she wouldn't think to password protect it. It synced to our shared cloud account. Most entries were vague: studio time, donor follow-up, inventory check. But a few had initials I didn't recognize. MG. Marco Galliano. This wasn't occasional. It was frequent. Regular. Methodical. And I'd been right there, making dinner and paying bills like a good little husband while she curated an entirely separate identity. Like I was just a placeholder until the paint dried on her new world. But the moment that finally broke me wasn't on Instagram or in her inbox. It was in a voicemail. Lucy had left her phone on the nightstand one morning while she showered. A notification popped up. I wouldn't have touched it normally. But everything was different now. It was a missed call from a number not saved in her contacts. I tapped the voicemail. Hey Luce. It's Marco. God, last night was everything. I wish we didn't have to sneak around so much. I hate that you still feel like you owe him something. You don't. You've given enough. You're mine now. Let's stop waiting. I played it 3 times. Mine now. She hadn't just betrayed me. She'd transferred ownership. That afternoon, I walked into the garage and stared at the storage shelf she used for studio supplies. 2 of the bins were empty. The ones labeled personal canvases and archival works. She wasn't transitioning. She was transitioning out. And I realized this wasn't recent. This had started long before New Orleans. Long before Sean. Long before I noticed her hiding her phone. This had been growing like mold beneath the floorboards. Invisible until it took over the whole house. And now I couldn't live in it anymore. By the time I finished pulling together the evidence, I wasn't angry anymore. That part had passed. Rage burns fast. What I felt now was colder, quieter. A sense of distance. Detachment. It was like watching a house burn from across the street. You don't rush in. You just take note of what's gone. But I didn't want to go quietly. I didn't want Lucy to slink away into her curated second life without having to look even once at the wreckage she left behind. She'd buried me under 100 tiny betrayals, soft lies, polite evasion, curated photos. But I was still here, and she was going to remember that. The opportunity came faster than expected. Marco's gallery, Linea Vita, was hosting a new exhibit. A multi-artist showcase with private patrons, critics, and collectors flying in from both coasts. Lucy had mentioned it offhand weeks ago. Marco's been prepping for this launch for months. She'd said it's a huge deal for the scene. Of course it was. I found the event online, Thursday night, RSVP only, black tie. The page was filled with promo blurbs about emerging voices, cross-medium installations, and the importance of authentic connection in modern visual storytelling. Irony apparently wasn't dead. I RSVP'd under an alias. Donor. New money. No one blinked. Then I started assembling what I needed. Photos. Screensh *TS. Voice memos. Copies of the lease. Marco's voicemail. The texts. The overlapping timelines. The Instagram posts. A curated gallery of betrayal, cut and organized into slides. I compressed it all into a single file, simple, clean, undeniable. Labeled it New Perspectives. Loaded it onto a flash drive. And then I waited. The night of the exhibit, I wore my best navy suit. Clean-shaven. Wedding ring off. I walked into the gallery just as the first round of champagne was being passed. The space was elegant, understated, whitewashed walls, suspended light orbs, music humming low beneath the sound of designer shoes and soft laughter. I spotted her almost immediately. Lucy. She stood near the front installation wearing a black backless dress and gold earrings I'd never seen before. Her hand rested lightly on Marco's arm as she spoke to a group of investors. She looked radiant. Composed. Like someone who hadn't just shattered a decade of shared life. Marco was beaming, gesturing at a canvas behind them. From across the room, it looked like tangled brush strokes and shadows. Perfect metaphor. I didn't approach. Not yet. Instead, I walked to the back of the gallery and found the AV station. A young tech assistant was stationed there, checking slides on a small monitor. I smiled. Hey, excuse me. I'm with one of the out-of-town patrons. We were told there'd be a digital artist's reel queued up. The assistant nodded, distracted. Yeah, should be scheduled after the second artist spotlight. You can plug it into that port. I handed him the flash drive. Just drop it in the queue. It's titled New Perspectives. They'll love it. He nodded again, barely looking at it. Got it. I walked away before the guild could catch up. I took one last lap of the gallery, noting the little groups forming, critics, curators, people Lucy would have courted for months. She was working the room effortlessly, her voice light, hands expressive. She moved like someone confident that the room would always stay on her side. Then the lights dimmed. A voice came over the PA system welcoming guests and thanking the patrons. Before we begin tonight's final presentation, one of our digital artists has shared a personal showcase and exploration of modern narratives and emotional transparency in contemporary relationships. Of course they bought it. The room darkened. The projector hummed. Then the first slide appeared. Lucy. Laughing, leaning into Marco at the vineyard. The second slide, her email to Sean, promising a weekend while I was away. Then the lease. A text exchange about how to sneak furniture out of our house without Trevor noticing. Then a video clip, blurry footage from the gallery's own event weeks ago, Marco and Lucy in the courtyard kissing under string lights. The room changed instantly. Gasps. Murmurs. A few people turned to look around, confused. Lucy froze. I watched her from the far corner. She stood rooted, eyes wide, mouth slightly open, trying to piece together what was happening. Marco stepped forward, squinting at the screen, then turned slowly toward her. The next slide was the voicemail. You've given enough. You're mine now. Let's stop waiting. Someone near the front audibly whispered, "Oh my God." Lucy moved then. Fast. She turned toward the AV booth, toward the tech assistant, but it was too late. The presentation had been synced. It ran on a loop. She turned again, this time looking for Marco. He stood perfectly still, watching the screen. His face blank. His hands at his sides. Then she saw me. I didn't hide. I wanted her to see. I stood near the exit, half in shadow, watching her watch it all unravel. Her face went pale. She opened her mouth, maybe to call my name. But I turned before she could say anything and walked out. No drama. No yelling. Just silence and truth. Behind me, the quiet unraveling continued, papers rustling, hushed voices, heels clicking across polished floors. The polite tension of a crowd realizing they had stumbled into someone else's tragedy. By the time I reached my car, the air outside felt colder. Clearer. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The image was burned into my mind, Lucy standing in a room of her choosing, finally forced to confront a version of herself she couldn't explain away. There would be fallout. Of course there would. I'd likely get a call from her. Maybe even from Marco. People would talk. Messages would be sent. But I didn't care. This wasn't revenge. This was documentation. I wasn't the villain in this story. I just finally stopped being the footnote. It had been a week since the gallery event. Lucy hadn't called. Not once. Not even a message to ask why. She didn't need to. The answer was already up on the screen, flickering across the walls of her perfect little world. I hadn't planned on hearing from anyone else. But then I got the email. Subject line, "We need to talk. I think we've both been living in the same lie." It was signed Allison. I didn't recognize the name, but when I opened the message, it all clicked. Allison was Sean's wife. The man from the emails. The one I had thought was Lucy's secret life. We met 2 days later at a quiet cafe tucked into a corner of the city I rarely visited. She was already there when I arrived, neatly dressed, eyes tired in the way only betrayal could explain. We didn't hug. We just sat. I thought it was an affair, she said, stirring her coffee without looking up. Turns out it was a practice run. They were planning to leave us. Just, not together. I nodded, the truth of it familiar. She signed a lease without me knowing. Moved furniture out when I was on work trips. Allison pulled a folder from her bag and slid it across the table. Sean and Lucy had fake financial documents. New tax forms. I found emails where she coached him on how to pull money from our joint savings. They weren't just having fun, they were planning a life. Without either of us. There wasn't much to say after that. No rage. No tears. Just quiet understanding between two people who finally saw the full picture. And in that silence, something strange bloomed, relief. We talked for 2 hours, not as victims but as survivors. When we parted ways, we didn't exchange promises to stay in touch. We didn't need to. What we gave each other was something simpler, validation. We weren't crazy. We weren't overreacting. We had been erased. And now we were stepping back into focus. Months passed. I moved out of the house Lucy and I once called home and relocated to Colorado. A quiet town. Mountains. Silence. I started working on an environmental restoration project. Something tangible. Something real. I adopted a shelter dog, Max. A mix of shepherd and something scrappy. Loyal. Anxious. Like me. We made a good pair. Life was simple. Mornings with coffee on the porch. Hikes with Max. A job that didn't need a suit. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was holding my breath. Then one day, an envelope arrived. No return address. Inside was a photograph. Black and white. Grainy. From the gallery event. In the image, I stood near the exit, coat over one shoulder. Just ahead of me was Lucy, mid-turn, unaware of my presence. Her face held a frozen kind of panic. Mine still, composed. I stared at the photo for a long time. Not out of sentiment, but recognition. That was the moment it ended. And the moment I began. I set the photo on my desk beside a small jar of river stones I'd collected on a hike. No drama. No flair. Just a quiet reminder. I survived. And more than that, I found peace.